This next story, I don't want to believe is true because it really chills my blood. I want to tell you guys a story about a man named Francis. So Francis moved into this home one day. He's a young man, he's in his early 20s, and he moves into his brand new home. And this woman knocks on the door. It's his neighbor. And she knocks on the door, give him cookies or whatever, and say, "Hello, I'm your neighbor." And Francis thinks this is the most beautiful woman he's ever seen. And they talk a little bit, and she's so perfect. She's his ideal woman. And not only that, but they see each other a lot. Maybe 2 or 3 times every week. So Francis is starting to think, I'm gonna ask this woman out. And then at one point, he decides to go on vacation. And guess who's at the same hotel when he lands in his vacation spot? It's that woman, Eve. Eve is her name. Eve is there. He's so amazed, but okay. And if you thought that was coincidental, what happens next is that the hotel clerk accidentally puts both of them in the same hotel room. So at this point, Francis is completely sure that Eve is meant for him, that the two of them are supposed to be together. This is complete kismet. And they get married. They get married and live happily ever after for 24 years. Then one day, when Francis is 52 years old, he dies. And it's a little unexpected, but that's how it goes. And Eve puts on a brave face at his funeral. Then the driver drives her home. And she walks into the house that they shared together. And she changes her clothes. And then she walks back out and over to the house right next door and walks right in. And she sits down and she says, "So did I collect enough sperm?" Yes, that's what she said. Exactly that. Have I collected enough sperm? So here's what really happened. Young Francis moved in to the house right next door to where Thomas Bradford and the alchemist, the magician and the alchemist, were living. And Thomas Bradford needed sperm, and he needed a lot of sperm. I'll tell you why in a second. And so what he did was he read young Francis's mind, and he was able to intuit exactly Francis's ideal woman. And he was able to make it to where his anamnesis was everything that Francis has ever desired in a female. He programmed her to be that way. And then, of course, Thomas Bradford is able to read Francis's mind that he's planning a trip. And so Bradford makes sure that Eve is on the same trip. And he also makes sure that the hotel clerk makes a mistake and puts Eve and Francis in the exact same hotel room. And so finally, Francis and Eve are married. And then they do lots of lovemaking. And Eve, of course, she's like a robot. So she'll do as much of that as Francis could possibly desire. Possibly more, I don't know. And every single time, this is insane. I can't believe I'm saying this. Every single time she would, afterwards, I guess he'd fall asleep. She'd walk right over and she would deposit the sperm into these jars that they were collecting. They collected as much sperm as they could from this poor Francis guy. And then once the sperm was no longer viable, it became necessary. I don't know why, but for whatever reason, for the next step that they were going to take, it became necessary that they kill Thomas. So that's why he died at age 52, because his sperm wasn't working anymore. I guess they justify it by saying that at least he got the best sex of anybody ever for 24 years. Perhaps that's how they think that it's okay to have done this to him. But I don't know what it would be like to be married to somebody who has no soul. That doesn't make sense to me. I'm like, if this person has a personality, can they really have no soul? Anyway, and I'm still questioning whether they have no soul. But anyway, so why did they need gallons of this guy's sperm? Here's why. They're trying to make a new anamnesis. So they want more than just the 2 that they have. They need people to be doing work for them. And apparently the way you do this is by gathering as much sperm as you possibly can. And that's just so you can find the sperms that are going to be viable to create an animesis. And then you also need, as you might have guessed, an egg. So now this process, the process of getting a female egg, fortunately, is not as deadly to the donor, but it also doesn't come without consequence. So here's what happened. Thomas Bradford had an idea for the type of woman that he wanted to recruit to be an egg donor. So he got this idea in his head, and he put that idea into his other animesis. Her name is Lilith. He put that idea into her head, and then he kind of magicked her into this perfect vision of a man. It's a super hot dude. So she went from being a female to being all male. So now she knows exactly what she's to do. She's to go out and find this perfect woman that Bradford has imagined, has programmed her to go find. So she does. And Mika Harich, the author, he's writing this book, and he's just making up some stuff. Like, he tries to fill in some of the details because he's also trying to write a book that's interesting to read. And so he tells this background story of this woman that they ended up getting eggs from. And it's completely unnecessary. It's totally made up. But he makes a point of saying that she's super promiscuous, that she just loves having sex with anybody. She just goes out and just having sex all. I mean, the way he describes her is like she's this huge nymphomaniac. But let's find out what happens to her. So Lilith walks into a bar, and there is Nancy. Nancy is the victim, or the egg donor. Nancy's there with her friend Maria. Lilith scanned everyone and saw that Nancy met all of the requirements. And so she goes over to Nancy and she starts, I don't know, Lilith as a man goes over and is stroking Nancy's leg, and it's very dirty. And Lilith says, "Do you want to get out of here?" Lilith wants to get Nancy to come with her. And Nancy says, "Well, not if my friend Marie can't come," because apparently Marie and Nancy had been wanting to do a threesome anyway. So Lilith is like, "Cool, come on." And so the 3 of them go to this apartment that Bradford has set up for Lilith to bring them to. The author then describes the 3 of them having sex and just how amazing it was for the 2 women and how many orgasms they had. And Lilith was just the most energetic lover of all time, and this would be the best lay of their entire lives. But anyway, once they're done, both women fall asleep, and they're actually in a magic-induced sleep. Now, whether or not they were given a drug, I'm not sure. They might have been. But they're not going to wake up. And that's when Bradford and the alchemist, who calls himself William, they come out. And I guess they get a needle, and they're able to extract all of the eggs from Nancy. All of them. Or at least as many as they could. And Mika Harich says that Nancy, at this point, is essentially sterile. Like, maybe there's a few eggs left there, but basically it's going to be hard for her to have a baby. Then, for good measure, just because they have Maria lying there, they're like, well, we might need it. And so they take all of her eggs as well. She wasn't even the person that they wanted. They take all of her eggs. So both women are now essentially sterile. And this is where I'm like, what did you say about love of the creator and high morality? Like, how is this okay in their minds? How is this not dark magic? I'm not a fan of these people at this point. And apparently it's totally cool. I think Mika Harich is trying to make the claim that it's totally fine because both of these women were super promiscuous. I'm like, no, still not fine. Anyway. So then they go back and they start mixing sperms and eggs in test vials. And they mix a bunch of them at first, and only a few of them are viable from the ones that they mix. And ultimately, they're able to create 5 animesis from this process. And these animesis look like little babies. They grow up like children and actual humans. And so I'm wondering, how in the world are they totally soulless? That part does not make sense to me. And he says that they're raised by William the alchemist and his wife. And then by age 15, that's when the magician sort of does something with them and makes them animesis. So they're just perfectly malleable. He can make them into whatever he wants. Okay. The book is about a few different immortal people and their origin story. But he said this one guy, he calls him the Egyptian. And the Egyptian has no idea how he became immortal. Now, a lot of them took a potion. Literally, he claims that there's this potion. It's like this red liquor. And you have to take it before you're 30 years old. If you're after 30 years old, you'll die. But if you're before 30, you might actually survive the process. But some people die even then. So they'll take this potion and then they'll be sick for a very long time. And the longer they're sick, the longer they live later on. The longer their immortal life turns out to be. But anyway, this guy, the Egyptian, he never took a potion. But at one point, the encampment he was living in, which was this hovel, was attacked by outside forces. And some dude kicked him to death. And it sounds like maybe he did die, but then just came back. So perhaps at that point, he stopped aging. But his life had been very long. But here's what was interesting about the Egyptian story. He said that finally, after sort of traveling around and living his life, he's finally started to meet other immortal people. And they started to band together, which is wise. And at some point, the potion that was making people immortal, it made its way over to Europe. Or people, magicians who knew a lot about this, made their way over to Europe. And the group of people that he was in, these immortal people, they didn't like that. They didn't want other people becoming immortals. And so they assigned one of them, his name is Fonz. They assigned him to go out and just murder everybody who was trying to create this potion and administer the potion. And he said that he did a pretty good job of it. He was able to keep a lot of people from ever getting their hands on that potion again, which is, I think it's kind of selfish, but anyway. But as a group with all of these immortal people working together, they were also able to amass an amazing fortune. And he said that they literally own more land than the church. That's a ton of land. And he said that, of course, it's not all under one name. It's under various businesses and organizations and various titles to sort of hide their identity. And he also then said that they essentially are based out of Switzerland now. Switzerland, where it's always neutral and there's never war. This is really starting to sound a lot like the Cabal. And I've always wondered why in the world the Cabal tries to, if they really do exist, all of their goals are extremely long term. So most of the people who are members of the Cabal would be dead by the time any of their goals came to fruition. Unless they're actually immortal. And then he also says, now we encourage those who believe that alchemy was a symbolic disguise from the church for non-Christian ideas concerning improving the nature and character of people and even spiritualizing the individual. So he's claiming that that's not what alchemy is, which I think that is what it is. I think that is actually what it is. He's claiming that no, it really is about turning base metal into gold. Maybe both things are true. But anyway, I'm really hoping for some of the stuff that he says that the author, Draja Miharic, is just making it up. Because this next story, I don't want to believe is true. Because it really chills my blood. All right, so let's talk about a man named Varmus. And he says Varmus is actually this rich old man, and he's living in a nice house with a pool, and he's got a couple of women in their 40s who've been with him for many, many years. And of course, both of these women are kind of waiting for him to die so that they can inherit his wealth. And Varmus knows that he's actually going to be dead within the year because his body has cancer. But he has no intention of giving either of these women his wealth when he dies. Instead, Varmus thinks that the best thing for him to do, is to kill them. That's better because otherwise they would just end up bitter old women in a nursing home. Anyway, so Varmus sits down, he goes into meditation, and he starts scanning all of his AK lines. What's an AK line? You'll find out. And he's clearing them into the pool. By the way, both of these girls are swimming into the pool. And he knows that's going to give them freaky dreams, but he doesn't give a shit. He could tell them to get out of the pool or wait till they're not in the pool, but he doesn't bother. So what are AK connections? Apparently there's some sort of psychic connection that you build or you develop with anybody that you interact with. And I've heard about that before, that you have these lines connecting you to all different types of people. And they sort of accumulate unless you start to clear them out into a pool with innocent people. And so he's looking at all of these connections and he's trying to find someone. He's kind of looking at all these people that he's interacted with. And finally he finds this one man. It's a magician he'd met long ago. And the magician's name is Draja Mikaharich. And he's like, I'm going to remember that one. And that's that. And so later on, he shows up in Draja's living room. He just kind of teleports himself there. And Draja is there, and Draja says, yes, I was waiting for you. He's not surprised that he showed up at all, because Draja had felt whenever Varmus had identified the AK line. So Varmus tells Draja that he's going to die, but he wants Draja to be the executor of his estate. And Draja's like, sure, I'll do that. And Draja also says, hey, I want to introduce you to somebody. I think you'll like each other. And Varmus is a little skeptical, but he's like, all right, fine. And so that's when he introduces him to his friend, Thomas Bradford. So Thomas actually has a plan for Varmus, something that he wants him to do. And Thomas agrees to help Varmus with his estate. And also Varmus wants to move from the West Coast to the East Coast. He's dying, so why does he want to do that? You'll find out. But Thomas wants to help him out with that so that Varmus can help Thomas with a project that he has in mind. And so both men agree, and Varmus gets his women and servants to all pack up his stuff so that they can all move across the country. And of course, Bradford's has 7 enemies, and they're doing all kinds of work for him, looking hot all the time. And he says that they stop at a hotel one night, and then the next morning, Varmus notices that both of his 40-year-old women who he was going to murder are gone. And Thomas sends him a psychic message about where they are. And so Varmus can instantly see that somehow these 2 women have been transported to some alternate reality where they're living the same day over and over again. It's like Groundhog Day, exactly. On the bright side, it's a beautiful, wonderful day. And I imagine that neither woman is aware of this. They both don't realize that they're in some alternate reality. I don't think they know it. So they're just sort of blissfully living the same day over and over again. And even though they're happy, it just seems horrible to me. I don't know why. I find this to be utterly awful to hear. Varmus doesn't care. He's like, cool. Okay, so they keep driving, and they stop at another hotel on the way. Thomas comes and takes Varmus. He's walking with him. They're chatting with each other. And they walk up to the hotel room that Varmus is going to stay in. And there's a hot man standing there right next to a really beautiful woman. And Thomas Bradford turns to Varmus and he says, here's a new body for you. And instantly, Varmus doesn't hesitate. He doesn't think about it. Instantly, he leaves his body. His soul leaves his body and just shoots into the body of this hot young man. And almost simultaneously, he's attacking the woman, making really violent love to her, pushing her into the hotel room. And she's totally fine with it. Like, she's allowing everything. And as he is engaged in this wild lovemaking, he is pushing this young man's soul out of his own body. He's still doing that. And then he can sense that the soul is just gone. And in his mind, it's not totally clear what happens to the soul of the person whose body he's just taken over. But as nearly as I can tell, he thinks he's just completely obliterated their soul into bits. And there's nothing less moral than that. Now, I don't really think that's even possible to do, but I think that he thinks that's what he's doing. And so, what a scoundrel. And Thomas Bradford, this person who spoke about how we should all have a love of our Creator, is completely facilitating the whole process. So this is how Varmus made it into the book about immortal people. Because Varmus has been switching bodies since time immemorial, who knows how long. And his story is in another book that I haven't read, but the gist of it is that he learned how to essentially stalk somebody that he thought, oh, I want to steal their life, and then go to them while they're asleep. And he's able to kind of make them think sexual thoughts. And somehow that makes them vulnerable to him taking over their body and shooting them out. So this is what he wanted Draja to help him out with, because he has a lot of wealth and he doesn't want to lose that wealth. But he needed to be able to transfer the wealth to a hot young man whose body he would inhabit without raising any eyebrows. And this is the way that they help him do this. And so Thomas sets him up into this nice apartment in the city. I think he's in Philadelphia. And he essentially assigns him to invest the family money. And that's what he does. He kind of helps them stay wealthy using the psychic techniques and everything like that. And Varmus, nothing bad seems to happen to this guy. Not only is he now wealthy, he's set up in this nice apartment in this hot new young body, but he's got all these women who are just crazy about him and who are essentially enslaved to him. So the two 40-year-old women who were living in dreamland for a while, once they were coming out of that dreamland, Thomas Bradford said that he needed to prep them. I don't know what he was going to do to prep them, but he was going to give them an option. And he doesn't make it clear what the other option was. He just says one option that they must have taken is that they will enslave themselves to him forever. I mean, how is that moral? And both women now, they look like they're 19. So for whatever reason, when they were in that dreamland, they were just aging in reverse. And now they look like they're 19. Anyway, that's it. This guy just makes a lot of money. He gets laid all the time. And he never pays any price for the way that he treats people. The end. That's what happens. The book is called The Long Lived by Draja Miharic. He's claiming that a lot of it's true, that there really are people out there who have been alive for thousands of years. I think that's nuts. But I also have an open mind, as you know. But if you have lived for thousands of years, feel free to message me. You can leave or if you have a story, an interesting story to share, you can leave a voicemail to the show. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Woo There It Is podcast, and I will catch you next time.